Good morning, everyone, and good morning to everyone in the Zoom room. Let's call it that from now on. It's the Zoom room. Maybe that's what it really is called. I don't know. Good morning, Taranay. How you doing?
Good.
Hi, Cambiz. How are you?
Good morning.
You
Morning,
good?
sir. How are you? How is
I'm good.
Daryl?
Thank you very much. And good morning, Geety. And we have with us the lovely, the wonderful, the amazing, world-renowned photographer, Miss Susan Jeffers. Hello, Susan. How are you?
Oh my God. I was like, who's on here? Who's he talking about?
Oh, we've seen your work.
I was like, wait a minute. Who's this amazing person you guys are talking about?
Well, we're glad you're here. We're glad you're here. And Farah is with us. Good morning, Farah. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning.
Good to see you. And look who's here also from way out in Tennessee, Joan Montgomery. What's that again? Facebook's not on? Yes, it is, babe.
I don't see
Wait a
it.
minute. Hang on. Maybe it's not. Let me see. Yeah, it's on. I don't know why you're not getting it, but it's on. Although I noticed no one else is up there either. I don't know what's going on with Facebook, but we're live. It says live. I don't know what's going on with it.
What's the name of the group so I can look it up and see if I can see it?
What, the Facebook group? It's just my page, Anthony Ballard.
Oh, okay.
And Gilbert is with us. Good morning, Gilbert.
Good morning,
We're so
Gilbert.
glad you're here. I'm going to say
Oh,
hi.
I see you. I see you. I'm liking it. I see you live.
Okay, we are on. Susan can see us, Nini. And as you can see, hello, Hushang, how are you? We're glad that you're here as well. And as you can see, Nini is on the premises, but not with us at this time. She got in very, very late last night. Like, I shouldn't even say last night, early this morning, like 3 a.m. So she's a little zonked. And I didn't say hello to you, Daryl. How you doing?
I'm fine. Good morning. How
You
are
good? I'm good. Thank you very much. You know what? We didn't do our morning song.
We didn't.
We didn't.
You ready?
You want to do it?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. Let's do it. we were so busy practicing, I forgot that we still hadn't done our morning song. I have wakened in thy shelter, oh my God, and it becometh him that seeketh that shelter to abide within the sanctuary of thy protection and the stronghold of thy defense. Illumine my inner being, oh my Lord, with the splendors of the day spring of thy revelation. Even as thou didst illumine my outer being with the morning light of thy favor. Splendors of the day spring of thy revelation, even even as thou didst illumine my outer being with the morning light of thy favor. I'm laughing because of that little flub I had. Like, okay, we have to do something to kind of clean that up.
Okay.
People often say, well, we didn't notice. I think they're just being kind. Anyway, folks, it's so good to see all of you here this morning. Again, hello to everyone out there in Facebook land and everyone in the Zoom room. Now, as you know, if you've joined us before, we are working from the book, The Proofs of Baha'u'llah's Mission, The Proofs of Baha'u'llah's Mission, and we are all the way up to chapter 11 in this book. And because this is a long chapter, it's a two-parter.
It's a two-parter.
It's a two-parter, which means that today there's going to be a cliffhanger.
So we'll get halfway.
And you have to come back next week to find out what happens. But again, we are studying from chapter 11, and the topic today is...
Before you go there,
yeah,
can we start with a prayer?
I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that, because I actually meant to, and sometimes I get on autopilot and forget to do things.
Understood.
Yeah. Is there a particular prayer you'd like to hear?
No, go for it.
Okay, here we go. Oh, my Lord, make thy beauty to be my food, and thy presence my drink, and thy pleasure my hope, and praise of thee my action, and remembrance of thee my companion, and the power of thy sovereignty my succor, and thy habitation my home, and my dwelling place the seat thou hast sanctified from the limitations imposed upon them who are shut out as by a veil from thee. Thou art verily the Almighty, the All-Glorious, the Most Powerful. And this is a prayer by Baha'u'llah. Now, as we were saying today, we're going to continue with chapter 11, and the topic of today is understanding why people reject God's manifestation. Understanding why people reject God's manifestation. And you know something, Daryl? I love the way that they have these chapters, these topics in the sequence that they have. I mean, we're not going to, rehash all of them, but chapter 9 was the necessity of recognizing the manifestation of God. Okay, and chapter 10 was the topic is people in every age have opposed the manifestation.
It's true.
Yeah, and now answering the question why. Understanding why people reject God's manifestation. And in this chapter, Abdul-Baha and Baha'u'llah list 7 reasons. That's right. 7 reasons why people reject God's manifestation. Today, we're only going to cover 3, maybe 4. But there are a total of 7 reasons that they list and go into great detail on. So I'm going to shut up. And Daryl, if you would be so kind.
Okay. Should you acquaint yourself with the indignities heaped upon the prophets of God and apprehend the true causes of the objections voiced by their oppressors, you will surely appreciate the significance of their position. Moreover, the more closely you observe the denials of those who have opposed the manifestations of the divine attributes, the firmer will be your faith in the cause of God.
Mm-hmm.
They are veiled and refuse to investigate the truth. We're talking about the first reason of this 7.
Mm-hmm.
During the days of Jesus Christ, the Jews were expecting the appearance of the Messiah, praying and beseeching God day and night that the promised one might appear. Why did they reject him when he did appear? Because they did not investigate the truth or the reality of Christ and were not able to recognize him as the Messiah of God.
Don't continue. Please repeat that.
Well, why did they reject him when he did appear? Because they did not investigate the truth or the reality of Christ and were not able to recognize him as the Messiah of God.
Mhm.
Had they investigated sincerely for themselves, they would have surely believed in him, respected him, and bowed before him in reverence. They would have considered his manifestation the greatest bestowal upon mankind. They would have accepted him as the very savior of man. But alas, they were veiled. They held to the imitations of ancestral beliefs and hearsay and did not investigate the truth of Christ.
So the first reason is just, this is what Abdul was saying, just plain old
Yeah, they
refusal.
didn't investigate.
Yeah, they refused to even investigate.
And now regarding his words that the Son of Man shall come in the clouds of heaven, by the term clouds is meant those things that are contrary to the ways and desires of men. These clouds signify in one sense the annulment of laws, the abrogation of former dispensations, the repeal of rituals and customs current amongst men, the exalting of the literate faithful. Let me go back. The exalting of the literate faithful
That's
above
illiterate, of the illiterate.
of the illiterate faithful above the learned opposers of the faith. In another sense, they mean the appearance of that immortal beauty in the image of mortal man, with such human limitations as eating and drinking, poverty and riches, glory and abasement, sleeping and waking, and such other things as cast doubt in the minds of men and cause them to turn away. All such veils are symbolically referred to as clouds.
And that's an important distinction that Baha'u'llah makes. This comes from the Kitab-i Iqan, the Book of Certitude. All of the, again, that thing that where so many of the words of former dispensations, people read those things and they read them and they take them literally. And what Baha'u'llah is telling us here is that all of that is not meant to be interpreted literally. And he explains a lot of what that term clouds means. So I just think that that's an important distinction that needs to be pointed out. That there are so many things. The number one reason, as you said, is they are veiled. People reject God's manifestation because they're veiled and refuse to investigate the truth. And Baha'u'llah lists what some of these veils are. And he says, all such veils are symbolically referred to as clouds. Yes.
Well, there's also an expectation that the manifestation of God will not have any human attributes.
Yeah.
That's the expectation. So they don't expect them to eat or drink or, be subject to any of those human frailties that allow them to exist in this world.
I'll tell you something. Yeah, I'll tell you something else that jumped out at me is this part where one of those clouds is the exalting of the illiterate faithful above the learned opposers of the faith.
Right.
The exalting of the illiterate faithful, those that have not studied whatever were the previous books and so forth, above the learned opposers of the faith. We need to point that word out too. So you've got these everyday folks that might not have gone to divinity school or anything, that might not even be literate, and they accept the manifestation, and they indeed, as a result, are exalted above those learned people that oppose the faith. And that in and of itself is a veil, is a cloud. It's like, why would you be accepting these people?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
It is evident that the changes brought about in every dispensation constitute the dark clouds that intervene between the eye of man's understanding and the divine luminary, which shineth forth from the dayspring of the divine essence. Consider how men for generations have been blindly imitating their fathers and have been trained according to such ways and manners as have been laid down by the dictates of their faith. Were these men, therefore, to discover suddenly that a man who had been living in their midst, who in their respect to every human limitation hath been their equal, had risen to abolish every established principle imposed by their faith. I'm going to read that again. Were these men, therefore, to discover suddenly that a man who has been living in their midst, who with respect to every human limitation hath been their equal, had risen to abolish every established principle imposed by their faith, principles by which for centuries they have been disciplined, and every opposer and denier of which they have come to regard as infidel, profligate, and wicked, they would of a certainty be veiled and hindered from acknowledging his truth. Such things are as clouds that veil the eyes of those whose inner being hath not tasted the salsabil of detachment, nor drunk from the qatar of the knowledge of God. Such men, when acquainted with these circumstances, become so veiled that without the least question, they pronounce the manifestation of God an infidel and sentence him to death. You must have heard of such things taking place all down the ages and are now observing them in these days.
That's a lot. I mean, it really, really is. And as beautiful as Baha'u'llah writes it, it's still a lot to drink in. You know, I'll admit that for me, this is just me talking. I'm glad for myself that I was not living at a time where I would be put to the test of recognizing the manifestation of God in someone that I already knew. That is a challenge. And yet, you know, I mean, trust me, because we have the benefit of the fullness of the revelation in the writings, we have that benefit, you know. And so, you know, I'm just saying for myself, I feel blessed that I was not living at a time where I would have been have had to deal with that test. I mean, obviously there are many that pass that test, and there are others that, you know, for whatever reason, they're veiled. They won't let go of. He says two things here that to me are very, very important. He uses those terms, which I meant to look up and did not. The salsabil of detachment, nor drunk from the qatar of the knowledge of God. And wait a minute, oh, they've got it right at the bottom. Salsabil is, I remember reading this now, is a fountain or river in paradise. And qatar is the river in paradise from which all other rivers derive their source. But again, these are metaphors that he uses that still he's basically saying that, you know, these things that have already been listed are as clouds that veil the eyes of those whose inner being hath not tasted the salsabil of detachment. So they're not detached from whatever their preconceived notions are, nor drunk from the qatar of the knowledge of God. And so when they, you know, observe even the greatness in this chosen being, the fact that he's still human, you know, because you're not supposed to just be human.
That's right.
Yeah.
Keeps them from accepting.
Yeah. So that's reason number one. All these, again, they are veiled and refuse. And it's important to put emphasis on that word refuse. They are veiled and refuse to investigate the truth.
Right.
Okay.
Reason number two. They weigh the cause of God with their own deficient knowledge. It is the veil of idle imaginations, which in the days of the manifestations of the unity of God and the day springs of his everlasting glory hath intervened and will continue to intervene between them and the rest of mankind. For in those days, he who is the eternal truth manifesteth himself in conformity with that which he himself has proposed, and not according to the desires and expectations of men. Even as he hath revealed so oft then, as an apostle cometh to you with that which your souls desire not, do ye swell with pride, and treat some as impostors and slay others. There can be no doubt whatever that these apostles appeared in bygone ages and cycles in accordance with the vain imaginations which the hearts of men hath devised. No one would have repudiated the truth of these sanctified beings. To this the scriptures bear witness. Thou hast no doubt heard about it. Consider the dispensation of Jesus Christ. Behold how all the learned men of that generation, though eagerly anticipating the coming of the promised one, have nevertheless denied him. Both Annas, the most learned among the divines of this day, and Caiaphas, the high priest, denounced him and pronounced the sentence of his death. For this reason he hath written, he that is exalted among you shall be abased, and he that is abased shall be exalted. References to this theme are to be found in most of the heavenly books, as well as the sayings of the prophets and messengers of God.
I see you're pausing. You know, I'm getting ready to pop in with something.
I know.
Again, that first line in this section to me, it is the veil of idle imaginations. Well, first of all, the subtopic of this second reason, they weigh the cause of God with their own deficient knowledge. So they're already deficient and they don't know enough. Okay, but they still use their meager knowledge that they have, or whatever they have, whatever they're working with, to come up with their own conclusions. And this first sentence in this section, it is the veil of idle imaginations, which in the days of the manifestations of the unity of God and the day springs of his everlasting glory have intervened. I'm going to shorten that and say, it is the veil of idle imaginations which hath intervened and will continue to intervene between these manifestations of God and the rest of mankind. So, Baha'u'llah often talks of, idle fancies and vain imaginations. And so, okay, in other words, sometimes when we don't understand something, we make up something we can't understand.
Right.
Yeah. And it says, had these apostles appeared in bygone ages and cycles in accordance with the vain imaginations, no one would have repudiated the truth. No one would have repudiated the truth. But as it also points out, actually it's earlier. It points out that it says, bottom line is, I'm going to just use my own again. Here we go. In those days, he who is the eternal truth manifests of himself in conformity with that which he himself hath purposed, and not according to the desires and expectations of men. So it's not going to be always what you expect, and yet you still have to investigate. I just thought, again, this is a whole lot. I don't know if anyone else feels that way, but I've read this before, and it still feels like this is a lot.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm stopping.
Thus, you know that before the observations of modern times, that is to say, during the first centuries and down to the 15th century of the Christian era, all the mathematicians of the world agreed that the earth was the center of the universe and that the sun moved.
I got to stop you here. I mean, not to repeat this or anything, but I think it's important to point out that in this section, Abdul Baha is talking about, it seems like it's a major topic shift, but he's talking about how, there have been plenty of times when the masses, even the learned masses, believed things that later were proven to be false. So, okay, I just wanted to point that out.
Okay. But there are some verses revealed in the Quran contrary to the theory of the Ptolemaic system. One of them is the sun moves in a fixed place, which shows the fixity of the sun and its movement around an axis. Again, in another verse, and each star moves in its own heaven. Thus is explained the movement of the sun, of the moon, of the earth, and of other bodies. When the Quran appeared, all the mathematicians ridiculed these statements and attributed the theory to ignorance. Even the doctors of Islam, when they saw, when they saw that these verses were contrary to the accepted Ptolemaic system, were obliged to explain them away. So that said that even the most knowledgeable among men were not believing what was in fact a different truth.
Mm-hmm.
It was not until after the 15th century of the Christian era, nearly 900 years after Muhammad, that a famous astronomer made new observations and important discoveries by the aid of the telescope, which he had invented. The rotation of the earth, the fixity of the sun, and also its movements around an axis were discovered. It became evident that the verses of the Quran agreed with existing facts and that the Ptolemaic system was imaginary.
Mm-hmm. So,
Reason number two.
yeah, they weigh the cause of God with their own deficient knowledge
And their own limitation.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, which we all have,
That's right.
but we should not allow those limitations to the extent that we are able to keep us from even investigating.
Yeah.
To keep us from even
Good
investigating.
morning, Nini. Mhm.
You look rested.
Reason number three. They blindly follow the clergy.
I'm going to already stop you there, Derek, because I personally feel that some people hearing this might feel a little uncomfortable with that statement. They might, let's face it, they might be uncomfortable with all of this, but especially the idea of blindly following clergy,
Right.
religious leaders, highly respected religious leaders, and blindly following them ends up being a veil.
That's true. My father always said, in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man rules. And this, when you start talking about clergy in former times, the clergy were the learned amongst the people of the land.
Mm-hmm.
So it was not considered, it was considered the right thing to do to follow the clergy.
Yeah.
Even though they may have had their own limitations, but they were considered the most learned amongst the people at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
and many people still feel that way.
a lot still feel that way.
Yeah. And we won't dwell on that, but many do. Blindly. I think we need to, at least for me, need to make a distinction about, really emphasizing that word blindly. Blindly means you're not questioning.
Right.
You're accepting whatever that leader says and you're not questioning it at all. You're not investigating at all. You are blindly following. And that can be a veil between that person who is blindly following the clergy and the ability to recognize the manifestation of God.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You want to continue?
Sure. Reason number three. They blindly follow the clergy. What is it that the advent of every manifestation of God has been accompanied by such strife and tumult, by such tyranny and upheaval? This notwithstanding, the fact that all the prophets of God, whenever made manifest unto the peoples of the world, have invariably foretold the coming of yet another prophet after them, and have established such signs as would herald the advent of the future dispensation. To this, the records of all sacred books bear witness. Why then is it that despite the expectation of men in their quest of the manifestations of holiness, and in spite of the signs recorded in the sacred books, should such acts of violence, of oppression, and cruelty have been perpetrated in every age and cycle against all the prophets and chosen ones of God?
Yeah.
Whatever in days gone by hath been the cause of the denial and opposition of those people hath now led to the perversity of the people of this age, to maintain that the testimony of the prophets of the testimony of providence was incomplete, to maintain that the testimony of providence was incomplete, that it hath therefore been the cause of the denial of people, is but open blasphemy. How far from the grace of the all-bountiful and from his loving providence and tender mercies it is to single out a single soul, from amongst all men for the guidance of his creatures. And on the one hand, to withhold from him the full measure of his divine testimony, and on the other, inflict in severe retribution on his people for having turned away from his chosen one. Nay, the manifold bounties of the Lord of all beings have at all times, through the manifestations of his divine essence, encompassed the earth and all that dwell therein. Not for a moment hath his grace been withheld, nor have the showers of his loving kindness ceased to rain upon mankind.
Okay, I got to stop you there, Daryl. I was going to stop you earlier. Because, I mean, okay, first Baha'u'llah, this is coming from Baha'u'llah. Yeah, he points out that, well, first he asks that question. Why is it that the advent of every true manifestation of God have been accompanied by such strife and tumult, by such tyranny and upheaval? Okay, so there is that question. And then he points out, even though every prophet of God has already predicted that there would be another to come.
Yes.
And yet when it happens, they don't accept it. And he also, I like the fact that he adds a connection between the past and the present. Notice he says, whatever in days gone by hath been the cause of the denial and opposition of those people hath now led to the perversity of the people of this age.
Right.
I think that's pretty important. Whatever in days, whatever has been the reason, whatever has been the cause of the denial and opposition of those people has now led to the perversity of the people of this age. And then he also points out, God's not going to expect you to know something without making it possible to know it. How far from the grace of the all-bountiful and from his loving providence and tender mercies it is to single out a soul from amongst all men for the guidance of his creatures. And on one hand, to withhold from him the full measure of his divine testimony, and on the other, inflict severe retribution on his people for having turned away from his chosen one. In other words, every manifestation comes with a full revelation.
That's right.
With a full revelation. And he's not going to hold us responsible for half a message, hold us responsible for a full message when we're given half the message. That's my kind of really, chopped up interpretation of it. But I just think that's, again, that for me jumped out as being very, very important. It says, not for a moment hath his grace been withheld, nor have the showers of his loving kindness ceased to rain among mankind. Right. You get the full message with every manifestation. I'm done.
Consequently, such behavior can be attributed to naught save the petty mindedness of such souls as tread the valley of arrogance and pride, are lost in the wilds of remoteness, walk in the ways of their idle fancy, and follow the dictates of the leaders of their faith.
Ooh.
Their chief concern is mere opposition. Their sole desire is to ignore the truth. Unto every discerning observer, it is evident and manifest that these people in the days of each of the manifestations of the Son of Truth sanctified their eyes, their ears, and their hearts from whatever they had seen, heard, and felt. They surely would not have been deprived of beholding the beauty of God, nor strayed far from the habitations of glory. But having weighed the testimony of God by the standard of their own knowledge, but having weighed the testimony of God by the standard of their own knowledge, gleaned from the teachings of the leaders of their faith, and found it at variance with their limited understanding, they arose to perpetrate such unseemly acts.
Yeah. So when we're talking about, why the manifestations of God go through such suffering and so forth, this explains at least part of the reasons. Yeah. These people have weighed the testimony of God by the standard of their own knowledge and gleaned from the teachings of the leaders of their faith.
Right. But we already know that the standards of their own knowledge are deficient.
That's right.
And it doesn't allow them to see or recognize the truth.
Yeah. He then goes on to talk more about leaders of religion.
Leaders of religion in every age have hindered their people from attaining to the shores of eternal salvation, inasmuch as they held the reins of authority in their mighty grasp. We're talking about religious leaders.
Yeah.
For the lust of leadership, others, through want of knowledge and understanding, have been the cause of the deprivation of the people. By their sanction and authority, every prophet of God hath drunk from the chalice of sacrifice and winged his flight unto the heights of glory. What unspeakable cruelties they have occupied the seats, what unspeakable cruelties that have occupied the seats of authority and learning have inflicted upon the monarchs of the world, those gems of divine virtue. Content with a transitory dominion, they have deprived themselves of an everlasting sovereignty. Thus their eyes beheld not the light of the countenance of the well-beloved, nor did their ears hearken unto the sweet melodies of the bird of desire. For this reason, in all sacred books, mention hath been made of the divines of every age.
Yeah.
For this reason, in all sacred books, mention hath been made of the divines of every age.
And remember that this section is talking about how people blindly following the clergy and blindly following the clergy becomes a veil that keeps them from recognizing the manifestation of God. And then he ends with that line that you just read, in all sacred books, mention hath been made of the divines of every age. And that's kind of saying, and it ain't been in a good, it hasn't been in a good way. Yeah, I mean, but I think it's also important that we point out that it's not always in a way that we would call malicious. Sometimes it's due to ignorance.
It's ignorance.
Yeah, it's ignorance. It says leaders of religion in every age have hindered their people from attaining the shores of eternal salvation, inasmuch as they held the reins of authority in their mighty grasp, some for the lust of leadership, yes, but others through want of knowledge and understanding have been the cause of the deprivation of the people. Want to do a song?
Sure.
Okay. This song is actually about, well, I'll just say the name of it is What Were They Thinking? they thinking when they put you in chains? What were they thinking when they caused you such pain? How could they miss what now is so very plain? How could they not love you, oh glory of God? Oh glory of God. Oh glory of God. Oh glory of God. How could they treat you with such utter disgrace? Stripped you of everything, they left not a trace. Your prison turned into a heavenly place. How could they not love you, oh glory of God? Oh glory of God. Oh glory of God. Oh glory of God. How could they not see all of your glory, oh blessed beauty? What were they thinking? 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 Did they have no sight? Could they be blinded by your glorious light? How could they disregard your heavenly might? How could they not love you, oh glory of God? Oh glory of God. Oh glory of God. Oh glory of God. How could they hurt you and still feel no shame? How could they trample your wonderful name? How could they be near you and not even change? How could they not love you, oh glory of God? Oh glory of God. Oh glory of God. Oh glory of God. How could they not see all of your glory, your blessed beauty? And how could they not recognize God's holy power right there in your eyes? What were they thinking? 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 What were they thinking?
Okay.
My middle finger had a mind of its own on this. The first couple phrases there.
I think we're at the end.
I guess we're going to go ahead and stop there. But that song is again, it's questioning for anyone who had the blessing of, and again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. I'm glad I wasn't put to that test. But for anyone who, it's one thing to not, for whatever reason, to not recognize the glory and power of the manifestation of God. It's another thing. It's a whole nother level to set out to, to block them, to torture them, to refute, their message and so forth and so on. And that's really what that song is about. We will continue this next week. There's, as we said, it's a two-parter, so we've still got a bit more that we will be covering next week. But at this time, we're going to go ahead and open up for anyone who would like to share a prayer or a song or a passage of your own choosing. And as always, we like to start out with our Camby's moment. You have something to share with us today, Camby's?
I have a prayer praising the glory of God, and that's exactly what we are talking about today, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Please.
والله متوجه الله دیده به ملکوت غیب جبروت باز کن و به این مناجات آغاز نیاز کن که ای مهربان تو صبر کن و بپوش خطا از ما عطا از تو جفا از ما وفا از تو گناه از ما پناه از تو بیماری از ما شفا از تو بپوش و بیامرز وفا کن پناه ده شفا بخش
Thank you, Camby's. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there anyone else who would like to share?